Hi, you guys. So, welcome back. I am here with Miss Ellyn, and I'm so excited. I'm just so excited to have you on. Like, we were just talking off air for a moment about how we've kind of been in each other's worlds for a little while. We like know some of the same people and been in the same kind of circles, but I thought we had recorded like 4 years ago together, but I was looking back and we have not. So, anyways, like, thank goodness we're
Here,
finally here.
we're doing the damn thing. It's gonna be great.
Yes, exactly. So I am so excited. Every time that I hear the word burnout, I think of you. You are so many more things than just an expert, I want to say, on burnout. But girl, you are definitely like in my world. I'm just like, if somebody talks to me about that, I'm like, go check out this account because she knows.
Mhm.
So I would love to hear a little bit of your backstory, how you got into, burnout coaching, some of the other things that you're doing, and just catch us up to speed.
Absolutely. Okay, there's always like a long story and a short story version of how I got into this. My short
Yes.
story is I burned out when I was in grad school. My long story is that I have always been kind of a very validation seeking, like high achieving human.
Mhm.
Like if I always feel like it would be a disservice to say how I got into coaching without throwing it back to when I was in high school. Because when I was in high school, I was a textbook high achiever. I did all of the things. I just like everything I did too. It was I wanted to be the best. I wanted people to praise me at what I was doing. It was just like just give me a gold star and tell me I'm doing a good job. Like that is like
Yeah.
what I wanted out of life, whether it was school or I played varsity soccer, I sang, I did musical theater, I played the piano. Like I did all the things. Like people would look at my life now and be like, how the hell did you survive high school? I thrived in it. I
Yeah.
loved it. It was kind of where I found fulfillment and who I was through all of these things that I was doing and the ways in which people reacted to them, which was very praised. Like when you're that
Yeah.
kid in high school, everyone's just like, good for you. Like it's exactly what I want
Another
to hear.
achievement. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but then it kind of became a little bit of a negative. So I was kind of like that in high school. I did that same thing again when I was in college. Like I vividly remember senior year of college, I was taking 400 level science classes because I was a science major because like
Whoa.
what's going to impress people? Oh, being a science major. So I was a science major. And I was taking 400 level science classes. I was working like 20 hours a week in a lab. I was a TA, so I had my own section of like a microbiology 101 course, and I was assistant soccer coaching. Needless to say, my boyfriend I was dating at the time and I broke up because I was a
Yeah.
robot and I had no life.
Yeah.
We
So
broke
many
up.
things.
I know, but like it was something that always had worked for me. But I'm a firm believer that we all get to a point in our lives where the ways in which we've operated when we were younger just no longer work. And
Yeah.
that was grad school for me. So I got to grad school. I started doing all the things again. I was going to be Dr. Ellyn. It was going to be great. And then I hit a wall. And I was just like, what is this? What is happening? I should be able to do all the things. Like I always have been able to do all of the
Hmm.
things. And then I kept hitting the wall again and kept hitting the wall again. And I was like, okay, something is wrong. It was like mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion. Like I was exhausted in
Hmm.
every way you could be exhausted, basically. And you go on Google to look for answers.
Yeah.
And it's stuff like work less, sleep more, quit your
Yeah.
job. And I'm just like,
And
thank
you
you,
can't,
Captain
can't.
Obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and I had no control over how much I was working.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I had a lot of control over anything, but I did what I always try to do and just push through. And then I
Yeah.
hit a point where I was just like, Ellyn, you cannot push through anymore. You need to do something different. And so I fortunately am a scientist by nature, and I just started researching the shit out of science and like all of on burnout and stress and on all of these things that are out there. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that there is a lot of like very evidence-based stuff out there about burnout,
Mm.
about stress, about even productivity and all of these things that we read self-help books about. Like
Yeah.
there's like legit like science articles out there, and I was in a really really good place because I could understand what the hell they were saying for the most part.
Mhm.
There's some stuff that's even too jargony for like a genetics and micro major like me. But like I was able to read it, I was able to digest it, and I was able to apply it to my own life and then teach it to other people. And that just like threw a monkey wrench into my life because I was like,
Yeah.
holy shit, I love this. This is the best I've ever felt doing anything ever. Crap. So long story short, I ended up dropping out of grad school because I just loved coaching and I loved supporting people. It took me until
Mhm.
about fall 2019 as the thing where kind of all of this stuff came together, which was funny because I described myself as a burned out doctoral student before I connected the dots and
Oh
realized that
my
burnout
gosh.
was my thing. So that's kind of how I got here.
I like to dive in right away, and I'm all about like the tangible tips. Like I'm obsessed
Yes.
with like giving everybody the tangible tips. And so my first question that I really want to ask you is, like when you're in that kind of, I struggle with using the word high achiever, but I still haven't found a better word for
Yeah, I feel you. Yeah.
this type of woman, right? But I've been there too, like just doing all the things and just like this general like high achievement personality.
Hmm.
You're in that personality, and that's like all we've known for so many years. Like this is how we get our validation. This is who we are. We are high achievers. So I'm assuming that when you read these articles or you get this advice that says like take a break, quit your job, go take a beach vacation, it doesn't feel good because you're like no, 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 like
No,
that's not what I do. So like what is that
no.
first step? Because you're reading this and you're like no, 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 I'm not going to quit my job. I'm not going to go
Yeah.
like take a sabbatical somewhere on a beach, as cool as that would be. Like
Yeah. Oh gosh, no, that's such a good question because I actually think in a lot of ways I did it wrong
okay.
because I felt like I had to fundamentally change who I was to
Ooh,
not be burned out. And in retrospect, that was not the way to go about it. Even in how I've run my business, I've tried to fundamentally step away from this high achiever person that I innately am, and it hasn't worked. I feel like it
mhm.
feels inauthentic to me to show up that way. And I actually feel like in a
Yeah,
lot of ways, the people that I connect most with feel that as well, like that
yeah,
I'm not speaking to them because they feel like I'm fundamentally asking them to change. So I think that's one red flag to
yeah.
realize. If you are that high achiever personality, we can work with our high achievement. We
It's
can
so
work
good.
with it in a way that isn't like slow down, journal, and do yoga and meditate. Like if
Yeah.
that doesn't feel good to you, then don't do those things. I am
Hmm.
definitely team meditation. I definitely think there's a big place for slowing down in our lives. I benefit a lot from journaling, but it's not all one size fits all. And I actually feel like the biggest thing that we need, which it's like easy to say but hard to do, is we need self-awareness.
Mm.
Like I feel like that right there is a superpower. Like whether we're talking a high achiever or somebody who doesn't identify with that label, the
Yeah,
most important thing for you to know to be able to recover from burnout is to develop your self-awareness, to start to be very, very clear on what are the things that are actually stressing me out in life. What are the things that are helping to prevent stress in my life? What are the situations and scenarios when work actually feels good versus when work feels like a should?
hmm,
Like that self-awareness is a superpower. And I understand that that is it's perhaps a little bit less tangible, but it is one of the most important things that we can do. And I
yeah,
think the where self-awareness comes from is something a lot of high achievers don't like, but I swear to you it's going to be really good for you. We've got to make space to just pause and self-reflect. We do.
yeah,
And it doesn't have to look like what I think we think it looks like. It doesn't have to look like I'm going to take the entire Saturday off and sit in a coffee shop and journal. If that's your jam, do that. I actually do that, which is why I'm using that example. But like, if that doesn't resonate with you, do you have like breaks between meetings? Do you have like
mm,
15 minutes that you can spend after you get off work at the end of the day to just take that pause button and let your brain go wherever it needs to go? Because when our
yeah,
brain goes wherever it needs to go, like that's when it starts to become like oh, that situation earlier today really, really felt awful and made me feel pretty crappy the rest of the day about the work I was doing and the way I was showing up, versus this situation felt really good. Like I literally told you right before this meeting, I cried a lot today, but
yeah,
actually that felt really good in
yeah.
retrospect. And I think the only reason I know that is because after I got off of that call, I went for a 30-minute walk.
Mm.
So it can look like these little pause buttons in the day. And high achievers love a good pause button that's like a multi-purpose pause button, so they're not
Yes,
multitasking. So I go out on walks because that gives me some vitamin D, that gives me
I
some
love
exercise.
that.
I try not to like listen to music, or if I do listen to music, it's either really chill or like instrumental music or something like that. And I just let my brain go in the background. And it's like this multitasking thing that I do that
Yeah.
simultaneously gives me that pause button to get self-aware.
I'm obsessed with the fact that you just said that. Like literally, like Like this is like the marker, like the clip in the episode, like let me be the reminder like that this was an important thing because no, seriously, like I love multitasking. Like I'm like, who doesn't? Like if you and I hate that advice when you're like scrolling through Instagram and you see like the advice of like, don't multitask, do one thing at a time. And it's like, no, like no, you're wrong. Like don't say that to me. But what you
Yeah,
just said is like it's almost like tricking our brains into, I want to say, like a healthier way to multitask, like, or a multitasking pause, where it's like you still get to do several things at once, but they're all conducive to like the pause. So, like doing the walk,
exactly.
clearing our head, we maybe, we don't have extra stimuli coming in, but we're able to get the vitamin D and to just chill.
Exactly.
I'm still multitasking. I'm still checking off several things off my box, girl.
Exactly. I almost think the reframe for me is realizing it's maybe not about multitasking, but it's like a
Mm.
multi-purpose thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And walking, going out on a walk is multi-purpose because fundamentally it's a
Mhm.
mental break, it's emotional break. It's great for me physically in so many ways. And like it's so it's got all of these different purposes lined up in one single activity. So it's kind of
Yeah.
even the same when I'm cleaning. I'm never just cleaning. Like I am cleaning and listening to a podcast simultaneously. So like there's things that I think we can do. I think this is maybe the place where like something like a multitasking has
Mhm.
gotten a bad rep
Mhm.
because I do think we can multitask, but we can't multitask doing two things that take the same amount of mental energy. Walking
Dang,
I can
yeah,
do without thinking about it. Like I don't have to put mental energy into going on a walk. So I can go on a walk and do something else while I'm
yeah,
walking. So I think
yeah,
that's a really good example of like if you're trying to multitask doing two things that take the same amount of mental energy, that's not going to work. That's
yeah,
it's not going to
yeah,
happen. But if you're multitasking doing things that one is just very easy, very very in the background, very doesn't
mhm,
take you any thought to do, yeah, you can multitask.
yeah. God, so good. Okay, so you have me in your office, okay? We're just gonna
Okay.
you have, like, the burned out. I always love
Right
to give
on.
the example of, like, the healthcare worker, right? Like, the because
Yes.
that's just what I see, like, that's as a nurse, that's who I'm surrounded by a lot of the time. And especially coming out like post COVID, everything, like all the hard work. Gosh, I just literally hosted my retreat. Like we're just coming off of it. It was last weekend. And I had a fellow healthcare worker there, and her and I both kind of had this moment around like the little fire pit where we were just like totally sharing the fact that we were like the world got to stop and like we truly didn't, like
No,
we
you didn't.
continued and continued, and if anything like we picked up way more hours than normal. So not only did we not get the pause, but we were overworked and the intense emotional stress of that time. But
And the healthcare industry, just in
yeah, in
general. It's,
general, right?
yeah. I
But
have a very good friend who's a nurse, and
oh
yes, so
yeah, you totally
I
get it.
feel you.
So, like, for this, like, this level of, like, burnout for somebody who's burnt out on all the levels, like,
Yes.
physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything, what is, like, a first step for somebody like that when they come to work with you?
So this is actually something that I will fully acknowledge that I have realized. I actually think the person I here, I'm going to answer this in a kind of backwards way.
Mhm.
I've realized I've done things wrong in terms of my services that I offer people because most people think they need a burnout coach when they're at that point. And actually, that's probably the worst place to work with a burnout coach because at that point,
Oh,
you're
wow.
like too burned out to do anything about your burnout,
Mm.
right? That's not to say we can't do anything at that point, but I've
Right.
realized like traditionally what people think they need at that point is probably the very, very last thing that they want.
Wow.
So like think about like you're this healthcare person. You are
Yeah.
burned out in every way you can think of, exhausted in every way that you think of. How good does it sound right now for you to have another meeting on your calendar every week to meet with a coach?
Yeah. Yep, it's a lot.
That probably doesn't sound like what you want. So
Mhm.
what I've actually realized is I'm even kind of changing the way I message and the way in which I talk about what I do because at that point what I would probably offer to you is I would offer what I need a better name for it because I currently just call it a burnout audit, but it's kind of I want to
Yeah.
think of it almost like this is a crisis situation. This is a life raft that I am throwing you because you feel like you're drowning. And in that time together, we would have like one meeting where we would literally almost take an inventory of this is all of the things that are going on right now and get very, very clear on what the non negotiables are and what the
Mm.
negotiables are. Because for a high achiever,
Good.
we see everything as being a non-negotiable. And it's
Yeah.
really hard for us to pull ourselves out of that mindset because we're a high achiever and we do all the things and we do it perfectly and we don't make any exceptions for ourselves. So sometimes we need somebody else to come in. I'm a sweary human too. Can I swear?
I
I think
love
I've already
it.
sworn once. Okay. Like we need somebody to call us on our shit and be like, look, this thing
Yeah.
that you're looking at on your calendar that you think is a non-negotiable is actually not.
Yeah.
So like having somebody come in, look at our lives, help us
Yeah.
figure out what the true non-negotiables and negotiables are, and then give ourselves like a 30-day game plan where maybe we like have like a 15-minute phone call or something like that over the next 30 days where we just check in and see what's working and what's not working. But where I give you like a tangible game plan to like take all that we've just done and actually put it into practice. That's, I
I
feel like,
love
what we
that.
need when we're in crisis mode. But what I
Mhm.
want to start training people to think about is I think of burnout as being a spectrum. When we're at the very like mild end of burnout, it's pretty easy to like call ourselves out, realize what's going wrong, and like course correct and recover.
Mhm.
Like I'm at the point, and I think this is what happens when you start to really get into the work that I do. I don't like never burn out anymore. I'm not saying that in the slightest,
Yeah.
but what I is my superpower now is I'm really good at recognizing when I'm doing things wrong and making course corrections in my life so that I can get back out of burnout. It's not that I never burn out anymore. I don't go past mild because I'm really able to recognize it. What most people do is if they're able to recognize it, awesome. But most of us aren't able to recognize it. And those
Okay.
bad habits, bad mindsets, bad behaviors, bad routines start to take a hold on our life. And we realize it, but we don't know what to do to get back to where we were before. That's the moment when you actually should work with a burnout coach. We don't want to get to the point where we are
Mm.
so crash and burn, like I am drowning in my life, burned out, to wait to work with a burnout coach. We need to start almost thinking of it like as a proactive and a preventative so that we don't get to that point. Like we don't want it to get to the
Yeah.
point where it literally derails our drive and our ambition and our goals, because that's literally like what makes a high achiever is being
Yeah.
driven and engaged. And when we get to the point where we're not like that anymore, we don't feel like ourselves. And
Mhm.
that's a really scary place to be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I remember, yeah, I definitely remember stories of for myself of feeling like that, where it's like I just want to throw it all away and I just want to go
Yes.
like be a Walmart greeter. Like nothing wrong with that job, no offense, but like that's just what I feel like. I don't want to be a nurse. But you know, when it's just
Yes.
so far from the identity that you had
Yes.
pursued forever. Can you tell us some of those like steps? So some of
Like
those first awareness steps where you're like, oh,
yes.
you might be heading towards burnout.
Yes. Yes. I'll tell you that in just a second. But before I do,
Yes.
I want to come back to what you just said about the
Yeah.
Walmart greeter thing.
Yeah.
I feel like every high achiever, I need to talk about this more because I've realized
Yeah.
how frequent this is. I feel like every high achiever has gotten to the point where they're like, can I just do a like low pressure job that doesn't matter?
Yeah. Yep.
Like
Mhm.
I remember vividly having a conversation with a friend of mine in an airport about like, oh my god, I just want to make coffee. Can I just
Yes.
like go work at Starbucks and make coffee? Which is funny because people get pissed when you mess up their coffee
Yeah.
order. But like, I just want like a low pressure job that
Yeah.
doesn't feel like has such high stakes. And I feel like that's a really, really common experience for high achievers.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to point that out. But in terms of like what to look for, I would say there's 4 types of burnout.
Okay.
And my
Ooh, yeah.
caveat with this is that this is how I see it. It does connect back to the World Health Organization's definition of like
Yeah.
burnout and what burnout is. But like I break it out into 4 types. Technically, they are all one thing. Like everybody is like, oh, 4 types. I thought there was only one type of burnout. Technically, yes. Technically, burnout is just one thing. But I think when we break it into types, it makes it so much easier to recognize the
Yeah.
signs. Because I think sometimes we think, oh, well, I don't have all of those, so I must not be burned out. Not necessarily the case. So the types of burnout are physical, overwhelm, emotional, and boredom is the 4th one. I will say
Ooh.
boredom burnout is uncommon in my experience,
Okay.
but it's definitely something that happens. So
Yep.
I'll give you some kind of identifiers for all of these. Physical burnout is absolutely what we're thinking of when we think of burnout generally. That depth of exhaustion. But when we're in physical burnout, it's a depth of exhaustion that it feels like no amount of sleep or rest is going to like get you back on track.
Yeah.
So like you could sleep 12 hours a night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and still wake up Monday morning and feel like absolute death.
Yeah.
That's the depth of exhaustion we're talking about with physical burnout. But what it can also look like, I think that's kind of where a lot of people's opinion stops with burnout, but what it can also look like is you're getting sick more frequently. Our immune system and stress are very interconnected. And when we are stressed out, our immune system gets run down. So we can start to just get sick, like on repeat. This is why I say, like, I am not somebody who is so far removed from the experience of burnout that I don't remember what it was like. A year ago, I
Wow.
did way too many speaking engagements in way too short of a period of time. And that's what happened to me, is I got sick like 3 or 4 times in the span of a couple months. My body was just like, homegirl, you are doing too much. Calm down. Take a breath. So that's how
Mhm.
it manifests for me, but it can also look like changes in your basic self-care patterns. So if you're usually somebody who sleeps really well and suddenly you're not, or you're usually somebody who has like a really hearty appetite and suddenly you don't get hungry until like after lunch, which is a very big sign of high cortisol, despite how much it might be celebrated to not get hungry, because yay, fasting in women, that's a mega sign of high cortisol to not
Wow.
get hungry. So like, actually, I've been DMing with a friend this week because we both had no appetite this week with everything that's going on in the world.
Yep.
Excuse me. And we both been realized, oh my God, I'm not eating as much as I should be. So like, that's another big sign to look for with physical burnout. So all of those things can be signs of physical burnout. It's not just being tired. It's when we see these shifts in our self-care and our shifts in our immunity and our ability to fend off diseases, those can all be signs of physical burnout. So like for me a year ago, I noticed that I was getting sick more frequently. And I was like, okay, roger that. I know exactly why this is happening. I had to shift how I approached my like day-to-day life to do exactly what we talked about a second ago, to focus
Yeah.
on the non-negotiables only and to figure out what absolutely did not need to happen. Like I actually found that exercise was almost a negative because that was
Mhm.
taxing me even more. So I just focused on walking and stretching and sleeping and eating, and it became literally down to almost like the bare essentials of like life at that point, not much
Yep.
beyond it, so that my body could recover.
Yep. Gosh, you are literally like, I know you're going to talk about, more of the signs, but literally just like this one, like you're checking like all the boxes from when I had like my very severe burnout, like all of this. I
Mm-hmm.
felt all of this. I was sick probably every other week. I feel like I was getting
Mm-hmm.
sick. I was just constantly sick. And it
Yeah,
was,
and you're probably sitting there going, what the hell is wrong with me? Like,
yep,
yep.
exhausted, sick, just everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's hard when your body, like when the very bodily cues that should be working for you to help you recover
Yeah.
from getting sick aren't there either. I think
Yeah.
that's why burnout can be kind of this like perfect storm scenario, is
Mhm.
when we are sick, typically it's like, oh, I just need to sleep a lot. I just need to
Yeah.
like eat chicken noodle soup or whatever. But when we have no appetite and we're having trouble sleeping because our stress levels are so high, it makes it even worse. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of why it's so important to like start to recognize some of these early indicators
Yes.
before they get crazy. So yeah, that's the physical side. Overwhelm is, I always joke that's like the productivity side of burnout. If there's two of the most common types of burnout, I actually think are overwhelm and emotional. I hear about those all the time from people, but overwhelm burnout is the productivity side of burnout. And what overwhelm burnout can look like is feeling like, well, actually, I think the first one is I would highlight here is analysis paralysis. When we are in overwhelm burnout, we we feel like we have too many tabs open in our brain. We can't make
Mhm.
decisions. We can't, like, sometimes we can't get started or finish the things that we're working on. Like, I feel like it's like, I always use the analogy of it's like the Cheesecake Factory menu all day, every day. Like, we just can't, there's too many choices. We can't make decisions
Yes.
because we've got this freaking book of options in front of us and we're just like,
It's too
where do I
much.
start? What do I do? I can't do it. Like, that's kind of what like day-to-day life is like when you have
Yeah.
overwhelm burnout. But what it can also, another big sign of overwhelm burnout is an inability to turn off. This is actually probably the one that I
Mm.
experience most when I'm in overwhelm burnout, is I'll try to go to bed at night and I am tired. Like, my body does want to sleep, but my brain
Yeah.
will not turn off. It's
I hate
like,
it.
which this is actually a biological thing. There's like a safety to that moment right before you fall asleep where your brain starts to feel safe to like do all of the things. And so that's why it's those moments when we're starting to almost like go into like monotony and unconsciousness that our brains just like, let's me give you all the ideas. So that is definitely something that is very, very typical and biological. But like when you're in overwhelm burnout, that's kind of your state constantly, especially before you go to bed, and especially when you're in social situations and you're trying to like be with your loved ones. You just can't seem to turn like the worker bee inside of your brain
Yeah.
off. It's just going. Also, I have a tip with that one too. Keep a
Yes,
notebook next to your
please.
bed.
Because I heard so many girls, so many of them who are like entrepreneurs and stuff that were at the retreat, like they all were struggling from this exact issue. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
please tell us how to fall asleep.
Yes, yes. I personally, my favorite thing to do is keep a notebook next to your bed.
I love
And
that.
I say a notebook because, and this works if you put stuff into your phone, but obviously that's not the best way to do it because we don't want that blue light when we're trying to fall asleep. But
Yeah.
so, like, what I would do is I would keep a notebook next to my bed. I actually would do this when I was meditating too. I know some people are like, oh, I hate meditation. I can't turn my brain off.
Yeah.
I actually, when I was teaching myself how to meditate, would keep a notebook next to me when I was meditating. So if I thought of something I didn't want to forget, I just wrote it down and went back to my
Smart.
meditation. And some meditation teachers hate that and it makes them cringe that I do that. And some meditation teachers are like, yeah, that works. Because there's something about like writing down the thing that makes
Mm-hmm.
our brain feel like it is inherently more dealt with, and our brain's able to let it go. It's almost like we have that processing feeling because we're afraid we're going to forget this really important thing.
Yeah.
But when we write it down, our brain's like, oh, we're good. She'll deal with that tomorrow.
Yeah. It feels so much better.
Mm-hmm. And it's so simple. Like literally, notebook next to your bed, put a pen on
Yeah.
top of it, and just keep it there.
I know. Dude, I love that you mentioned this too, by the way, like, because I did the whole like phone thing, like the phone notes, and I still do it, like, guilty as charged, right? But like, because it's so easy. But here's what always happens is then you grab Instagram and then you follow into threads and
Yes.
then you're on TikTok and then it's like an hour later and you're just like, now your mind is going even more. So, not the
Yes.
vibe.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, there are few of us who have the discipline to
Hmm.
open the notes app only,
Yeah.
write down the thing in the notes app, and then close the phone.
Mhm.
Most of us aren't like that.
Yeah.
And like, even if you're like a digital planner person, like I am a digital planner person,
Mm.
it's okay to have that on a piece of paper because you know what I do? I rip that piece of paper out in the morning and I go put it into my digital notes.
I love that. Yes.
Like, it's doable no
So
matter what.
good. So
So
freaking good.
that's the overwhelm side of burnout. The emotional side of burnout, I'm a burnout coach, so I think it's okay to say that this is my favorite one. This is also the one that when I was in grad school, I was in. And inevitably, when I talk about these types, people will always ask me something along the lines of, can you have more than one type at a time? Yes,
Mm.
100%. But what I will say is that there's usually one type that is driving the other two. So when I was in grad school,
Okay.
emotional burnout is what I was experiencing. And because I was emotionally burned out, I experienced two other types of burnout on top of that. And I'm going to tell you why that
Mm.
happened. So with emotional burnout, really one of the biggest things to look for with emotional burnout, and I see this very frequently in clients that come to work with me one-on-one, emotional reactivity.
Okay.
Most often for women, quick to tears, but it absolutely can be quick to anger. Do
Uh-huh.
you feel like you're emotional? Oh yeah, you
I
feel
was
like
like, my
you're
husband's got
emotional.
to listen to this. Hello.
To like, I literally shared stuff earlier this week, and I was just like, hey, if you're having a heavy week, if the state of the world's like getting to you, like this is what you need to do, because that's how we can get. We feel this
Mhm.
emotionally heaviness that hits us and we can't seem to shake it, and it's like all we can do is cry it out. Well, the reason why that helps is because it helps resolve our stress cycles in a very,
Yeah.
very like very big way. But like when we cannot get through a conversation, even just like a normal everyday conversation without breaking down in tears, I'm not talking about like this is an emotionally heavy conversation and so therefore it's making me emotional. I'm talking about can't even tell like basic stories without breaking down in tears, or you can't even have like a normal conversation with your husband or your kids because you're snapping at them and you're yelling at them and
Mhm.
everybody is getting on your nerves. That's emotional reactivity, and that's a sign of emotional burnout. So that is a big one to look out for. What it can also look like is social isolation. I think these two are very tied together
Interesting.
because when we are like that, when we are like super emotionally reactive, we don't want to be around people because we don't
Yeah.
like how we are behaving. So we isolate. I literally, when I was in grad school, went from being the social chair of my graduate department to being a hermit. Like, I hardly ever hung out with anybody. And when I did, I just was like a shell of myself. Like,
Yeah.
I was just trying to isolate myself away from people because I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and I didn't want to snap at them, and I didn't want to cry in front of them because I was
Mhm.
embarrassed to cry in front of them. So
Mhm.
we'll isolate when we're like this as well. But perhaps one of the biggest ones, that I actually think the last two are the biggest ones that are like the fly under the radar kinds of things,
Mm.
numbing behaviors.
Dang, yeah.
Humans are professional numbers, I joke, because we're so good at finding ways to numb our emotions, especially high achievers. We like don't tend to like our emotions. Our emotions are like
Yeah.
roadblocks to us. So
Slows
we're
us
just like,
down.
exactly. Like, I'm not productive when I'm emotional, so I'm just going to numb my
Yeah.
emotions. We're really
Yes.
good at finding ways to numb our emotions. We numb with alcohol, we numb with food, we numb with like the crappy reality TV show that we watch and we have
Yep.
no idea why we watch it. We numb with social media, but we can also numb with things that are incredibly productive things to numb with. We can numb with work.
Yes.
We can numb with exercise. Though, make no mistake, those can be numbing behaviors too.
Wow. I love this. I've been on my own little self-discovery journey to see like why am I keeping my calendar so busy? Why do I like filled up all the time? And it's that's totally just that numbing
Mm-hmm.
behavior.
Mm-hmm. And see, like, that's where that self awareness piece we talked about before comes into play,
Yeah.
because you can start to develop the self awareness to like really ask yourself. That's why I literally said this the other day, and I was like, oh, that's good. I'm going to remember this. Is work coming from a good place or a should place?
Ooh, so good.
Because if it's coming from a good place, this
Mhm.
is where I'm different than a lot of burnout coaches. I'm not about to tell you to like stop like go getting and stop
Yeah.
being ambitious and stop having drive. I even think I'm like testy about like the whole notion of overwork, and I freaking hate work life balance. I think balance is absolute bullshit because it's like overwork according to whom? I was having
Yep.
a conversation with somebody the other day about how like overweight and overwork are almost kind of synonymous. Like,
Yeah.
overweight according to whom?
Mm.
The same thing
Mhm.
with overwork. Overwork according to whom? How do you know what's
Yeah.
healthy in terms of me and my work ethic and what I can handle? You don't. Same thing,
Yeah.
like you don't know what's healthy for me and my weight and what is a healthy weight for my body.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. It's the
Oh, that's
exact
so
same
good.
thing. But
Yeah.
we have to have the self awareness to know, is this coming from a good place or is it not? Over the summer, every time I
Mhm.
had to sit down to work, I was just like, I don't want to be here. This is the only nice time of year in the area that I live. I want to be outside having fun. So I summered really hard. But right now,
Yes.
I've got all the ideas and I'm in a really motivated season. I probably work more than any burnout coach ever should. But don't tell me that I'm doing anything wrong, because in the grand scheme of the last 6 months, I've actually been very balanced.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
So that was a tangent, but I have strong opinions about
Really,
the
but that's
notions of
like
like, yeah,
yeah. And that's why, like, I do think that it's not necessarily imperative. It's imperative for you to do the self-awareness work, but
yep.
it is also awesome to have somebody like you in their corner so that you can be
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, hey, can I just talk this out with you? Like, do you think that this is
Exactly.
like me being super burned out and numbing out, or is this me just like enjoying the summer and
Yeah.
kind of wanting to like step away?
Yeah, and it's simultaneously on the other side of it. Like, is this me numbing out with work, or am I
Mhm.
just in a season where the hustle feels good and I like
Yeah.
it and I'm driven? Like, if you're working to the point where you feel like you're missing out on your life, that's
Yeah.
probably a red flag that you are numbing with work. But if the
Mm.
work feels good and it doesn't feel like it's negatively impacting you in any way, I feel like,
Yeah.
who am I to say that you're doing too much? So, but I
Yeah.
think numbing behaviors is a really important thing to look out for and to really develop the self-awareness around of, are you doing this for a should reason or a good reason? That's a
Yeah.
good question to ask yourself. And then the last thing to look for with emotional burnout is, especially with high achievers, apathy, negativity, pessimism, and just like being like disinterested and disconnected.
Oh yeah.
When high achievers are very engaged. We literally just talked about how good like our work ethic is. We are
Yeah.
very engaged, very motivated. You need somebody to get shit done, call a high achiever. Like, we
Yeah.
got you. We'll get it done. But like, when a high achiever dips into a time and a place where they don't care,
Mhm.
that's a big red flag for a high achiever, because we care.
Mhm.
We care. And when we get
Yes.
into that apathy place, that's us very much in the thick of starting to emotionally burn out. So when
Yeah.
I was in grad school, I numbed with, I did ultimately was, I was unfulfilled. That's what the emotional side of burnout is. It's the lack of fulfillment. And when I was in grad school, I was unfulfilled. So I tried to chase all of these other things to fill my cup and to feel better. So I overwhelmed myself as a result of that because I got involved in so many different things. I was literally doing a master's and a PhD simultaneously.
Damn, girl.
I started a side hustle. I was doing like Michigan Science Writers. It was like the science communication thing. It was kind of like me in college again. I just got involved in 80,000 things.
Yeah.
And when I think about it now, I realize it was like a numbing thing,
Mm-hmm.
but the numbing led to overwhelm. And because I didn't do anything about the fact that I had 80,000 things on my plate, I phically burned myself out. So I hit those
Yeah.
three because I did not have self awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. My gosh. It's just so easy to do,
It
it
is.
really
It
is.
is. Yeah. So those are our first three types of burnout. And the last one's quick. The last one's boredom burnout. And this one, when I talk about it when I'm doing speaking engagements, I got a question once about like, well, what's the difference between that and emotional burnout? And actually, in a lot of respects, boredom burnout and emotional burnout are very related. I
Okay.
separate them because I think the causality is different. With
Mm,
emotional burnout, it is very much about a lack of fulfillment. Like you just genuinely do not feel fulfilled about your life, your
yeah.
work, whatever. With boredom burnout, it's not so much about a lack of fulfillment. It's like a lack of interest or engagement or
Mm,
like stimulation. Like we've got to be interested. Like it takes a
yeah.
lot of energy and effort to show up for something that you don't find interesting. It
Yeah.
does. So like boredom burnout is really about realizing like it's not that I'm unfulfilled by this. I'm just doing too much monotonous, tedious stuff that I don't find interesting and it's sucking the life out of me.
Yeah.
It's like when life feels like you're going through the motions and it just feels like there's a lack of challenge and a lack of interesting things happening in your life. That's when boredom burnout starts to become an issue.
I've totally been there. Like, probably, I want to say maybe a year or so post COVID, or even just in general post COVID. Because when I worked as like a COVID nurse specifically, it was very high intensity for a while there. And then it kind of stopped being so intense, but it was extremely high intensity for quite a while. It was just very busy and I was working like all the time. And then as it kind of dropped off, and then I went back to my old job, it didn't feel the same anymore. It was
Yeah.
so different because I was used to this really like, more critical situations and very high intensity and all of that. And then I went back to kind of like quote unquote like regular nursing and it was just like,
Yeah.
whoa, like weird. And so I ended up making like a little career pivot to kind of change that because I recognized I felt
Yeah.
so bored.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I shouldn't feel bored. Like I'm obviously working and these are still very important things, but it just didn't feel the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there's sometimes, I think shame is a big thing with high achievers.
Mm.
Like we generally, I find, don't feel guilt so much as we feel
Ah,
shame. And I feel like with a high achiever, there's perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong in your situation, but there's perhaps a little bit of shame about like, why doesn't this inspire me the way that it used to? Like,
yeah.
I chose this. This is the path that I said I wanted to be
Yep.
on. Why do I feel this way?
Yeah. And all the work too, just like what you've explained, like all these degrees, all the work, all the schooling in it.
Ooh.
And then you're just like, well, I spent thousands and thousands of dollars. I spent years of my time to get
Mm-hmm.
to where I am now. Like, how dare I
Mm-hmm.
feel unsatisfied?
Yep. Hit the nail on the head for how I felt with graduate school and why I didn't leave when
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to leave.
We got a dog here in the room.
Oh,
I'm like, shh, but she
sounds
clearly
like a human.
she feels the same way. Um, she's like, I'm bored. But yeah, like it really does. It just, it happens. And then, like you said, like we slip into some of these other behaviors that like,
Mm-hmm.
are related to burnout. And then as we're doing, like, at least I speak, for myself, like I don't know the science behind this, but I know for sure that as I started to feel that way, just kind of bored and a bit overwhelmed, it did lead me into all of these other behaviors that like further brought the burnout because instead
Mm-hmm.
of going about my usual activities of maybe going out, like I used to go to the beach all the time and I'd walk along the beach and like do a nice like walk or something like that. I stopped doing those activities to take care of
Yep.
myself. So I got even more burned out
Yep.
and it just was a
Yep.
cycle.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is, again, I know we've said this like so many times today, but like that
Mhm.
self awareness and why that self awareness
Yeah.
becomes so important. If I had I think when you're young and you're in your 20s, you're just kind of plugging along, taking the steps that you're told to take, and there's really not a
Yeah.
lot of self awareness in that. But when it's almost, I don't ever want people to get to the point like I did, and it sounds like you've experienced as well, where you have to hit this wall to start to develop that self awareness.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
will acknowledge that sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes, like, the pain has to be the motivator for change. And that's unfortunate, but I also feel like that's human nature. But if we can get to the point where we start to recognize like these little nudges, like I used to say, like,
Mhm.
I don't have an intuition. I used to joke that my mom is the intuition that I don't have. Like,
Aw.
I'm a scientist by training. Like, intuition is
Yeah.
not something that I feel like somebody who's analytical like me usually latches onto. But we
Mhm.
all have these little like nudges that we get. These little like, this doesn't feel right. Like, and if
Yeah.
we can just start to pay attention to those, or start to pay attention to those sensations in our body, like your body is literally constantly communicating with you. It's like that book, The Body Keeps the Score. Like, your body is
Yeah.
constantly communicating with you about situations that feel good and situations that don't feel good. And the cool thing about that, because we are just such a awesome little machine, is that's often tied to your values and your, the core aspects of who you are. Those little nudges and those little feelings that we get, like that tightness in our stomach when something just doesn't feel like aligned, like that's literally your body telling you like, this is a values misalignment, this is a boundaries violation. And if we can start to pay attention to those things, huge, massive transformations can happen as a result of
I literally could talk to you forever. Like, this is so
that.
freaking good and so powerful, like, and just knowing, pretty intricately, like, what the different types of, burnout is, like, what they look like. And I feel like we really are clear on, like, our first steps. Like, really the
Mhm,
awareness is, like, the most
mhm,
important thing, like,
mhm.
paying attention to ourselves and honoring ourselves.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And focusing so much more on not balance, but sustainability. Like,
Yes.
that is really, I think, the final, like, if there's like a mindset shift I could encourage people, because really with a lot of this, I don't feel like in a lot of ways burnout recovery is not unintuitive. Like, it's actually
Mm,
very straightforward. Like, you probably need self-care, you probably need some like more boundaries. Like, we know the things we need to do, it's not a matter of not knowing them, but for a lot of us it's a matter of having too much of an all or nothing mindset. It's a matter of not thinking about sustainability. It's because we perhaps bought in a little bit too much to this whole like work life balance BS that we've been sold. Like,
yeah.
it's about these like subtle shifts to how we work, to our systems, to our self awareness, to our self compassion. And all of those cumulatively just start to help us create lives that are more sustainable. I will never, ever, ever tell a high achiever to dim themselves, to dilute their ambition, to be less intimidating, like any of
Mhm.
that. Like, be your badass self. Go for it.
Yeah.
Chase the goals that you have. Build the empire you want to build. Create the legacy you want to create. Do all of that. Like, but do it sustainably. Don't
Yes.
try to do it in the next 6 months, even. Give
Mhm.
yourself time to suss it out, to figure out what works and what doesn't, to experiment, to like put your lab coat on and like play around and see what works. That's how we create what I call a burnout proof life and a burnout proof business.
Oh, I love that burnout proof life. And I love that you just gave us the permission again to like set the boundaries. Like, I feel like at this
Yes.
time of year, that is like the one of the biggest thing that starts to come up. And, like we feel bad or we feel guilty for certain things. But it's like, no, like we have to take care of ourselves first. We
Mm-hmm.
really have to honor ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
set those boundaries. Like, let's just try to, get that burnout proof life going.
Yes. Yes. And
I
like,
love
don't
it.
ever let somebody make you feel bad for the boundaries
Yeah.
you're setting. I know it's perhaps a harsh perspective to come from, but if somebody doesn't respect your boundaries, they don't respect you either.
Yes. Oh
So
my gosh. Yes.
that like, do it. It's you're not
Mhm.
doing anything wrong by having boundaries. You're not a bitch. You
Yeah.
are you are a human
Yes.
with needs and with limits and with capacities. Like, set the boundary. Yeah, we could absolutely talk for another
I know, I was like, we need like a whole I like had a whole
hour.
series of questions about boundaries, but truly like yeah, honestly, like that, just knowing that, like, I feel like that is like the perfect wrap up. Like,
Permission granted.
permission. Yep. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Will you tell us first where everyone can find you, what you have coming up, all of that good stuff? I know you do so much. You have your podcast, you do
Oh
speaking
my
gigs,
god.
like you're everywhere.
Yeah.
And so we need to know where to find you. And then will you just kind of end us with like your number one tangible self love, self care tip, just something that they can go do tonight?
Okay, so in terms of okay, first part was where can they find me, right?
Yes. Yes. Where can we
So
find you? Where can we get plugged in?
I'm like, wait, what was all the stuff? So where can you find me? I'm Coach Ellyn everywhere. So it's Coach Ellyn. I do spell my last name or my first name a little bit weird, and don't even worry about my super German last name because I use it nowhere online. Yeah, but it's Coach Ellyn, Ellyn. My website is coachellyn.com. I'm at Coach Ellyn on Instagram. I have recently deleted my account on X, so I'm not on X/Twitter. I'm not there anymore, but I'm on Threads. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm just trying to start being more active on LinkedIn. But perhaps like if you want to just like get to know me or just get a whole bunch of like free
Yeah.
content, Instagram's a great place to get to know me. Podcast is a great place to just get a bunch of free content. My podcast is called Burnout Proof, and I would love to have you all listen. And in terms of like what I do and how I can help people, oh my God, so I told you guys sustainable is my big thing. I have what
Yeah.
I call a sustainable success framework, and I have like 3 pillars that I coach in. But the first one is sustainable systems. And I always joke that I am the burnout coach that isn't just going to talk you through productivity and time management. I'm going to like help you build it. I'm way tech
Nice.
savvier than I've ever given myself credit for. If you need to
Yeah.
build like true business systems, if you need automations, if you want, like maybe you're a solopreneur, but you want to start leveraging AI and like starting to treat AI like your coworker, I can help you do all of that. I have a program called the Sustainable Systems School where I teach you all of those things.
So
So
cool.
that is definitely a big part of what I do. I'm going to be launching in 2025 a program called Burnout Proof Business, where it's literally going to be like my group program, like behind the scenes, everything you need to know about building a business that is burnout proof. We're going to be talking sustainable marketing, how to create a sustainable offer suite, create a sustainable schedule, like all the things. I'm really excited for that. I've been like planning that for like a year and a half now, I
Yay.
swear.
Oh my gosh.
And then I have private coaching, which is also just like kick ass. And then if you're like, cool, I need burnout support, but I don't want to pay for it, then have your company hire me. I do speaking, I do consulting.
Smart.
And I'm actually creating like an EAP alternative, so an employee assistance program, like alternative that's like beyond like meditations and like workouts. I have
Oh my
so much. This
gosh.
is why I'm
This
like,
is
I
so
can't be a hypocrite and tell my clients that they have to do less because I sure shit don't. So, and
give
yeah,
us
and so
that
that's
like yeah, I was just gonna say give us like that self-care tip for like tonight.
yes,
Like
yes. So then the self care tip for tonight is I always think it's really important to redefine what we count as movement. So start thinking of
mm,
self care like snacks. So if you can only take a self care snack tonight, that's all you've got time for. That's what I want you to focus on. If you don't have time to do the 45-minute workout or 45-minute walk, can you do a 5-minute or a 10-minute walk? So give yourself a self care snack tonight. That would be my
so
self care tip.
cool. Oh, I love that. I love that idea. I'm gonna make sure like that's like all over Instagram. Like that is so cool. I love it. I just want to say, like, thank you so freaking much for being here. You are just amazing. And I know that we've all learned so much and just ready to kick off this burnout proof life. Like, let's
Hell
go.
yeah. Let's
We
do it.
deserve it.